Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Brian Bradley, who's the Senior Managing Partner at Bradley Legal Corp. Brian, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike, for having me on. It's going to be an important topic, and I'm going to try to keep it, fun and not legally dense.
Right. Yeah, that's the rub. Is there's a lot of dense topics, but we want to make it relevant and understandable. So before we dive into how to be and stay protected and protecting assets, give us a little bit of your story and your background. What got you into the legal profession in the first place?
Yeah, so I got into law school. I was an injured college athlete, wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And my mom actually convinced me to go to law school. She's like, no, you're just naturally good with logic and arguments. Just go to law school. It's like, I don't know, I kind of want to be a Navy SEAL and blow stuff up and jump out of airplanes. And she's like, no, you're young coming out of college. Just try law school for 1 year. And it's like, okay, fine, I'll try law school for 1 year. Went to law school. Was interning at the DA's office the prosecutor's office at the same time going to law school. I just fell in love with law. Yeah. And it was easy for me, graduated top of my class. It was, I was very studious, but it's just the law just naturally made sense to how my brain works. And then the economy tanked coming out of law school. So my immediate walk-in job.
Which time was that?
Right. Yeah. Right. Now, it's a good question. So that was, 04, 05, I started, came out, and then right when the 08.
The real estate crash of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, that big real estate crash, which, took all the jobs away. And so I had to kind of reshape myself from, going into criminal law as a prosecutor, then transitioned into civil law. And then that transitioned into, just becoming a really good trial lawyer. But then I realized, okay, hey, there's a lot of people working really hard, creating all of their assets, and there's a lot of predatory lawsuits, fraudulent lawsuits going after and targeting people who are rich or presumed to be rich, or investors, real estate investors. You wear in a white coat, and maybe you're just out of residency and you don't have any money, but you're wearing a white coat, or you do what a lot of residents do. And, I'm out of residency, I'm going to go buy 2 Porsches and be poor, but, you got a white coat and a Porsche or a BMW, and now you're presumed to be rich.
Yep.
You're going to be a big target on your back, whether you like it or not. And I was like, well, I felt bad for a lot of clients wrongfully being sued and just having their lives turned completely upside down. And I'm representing them in court. And I was like, man, there has to be a way to get ahead of this game to protect their assets. And I started researching. I'm like, oh, well, that's what, the new term asset protection really is, which we'll break down what it is, in a minute. But I was like, I really want to start transitioning away from taking assets from people, or, having them come to me too late before there's something that, nothing.
Yeah, you can help them at that point, but you're like, could it have been prevented?
Could it have been prevented? Yeah. And even if you're trying to set up asset protection systems after you're getting sued, is too late. You're too far down the rabbit hole. This is fraud at that point.
Yeah.
So, anything that you have to set up has to be done beforehand. And that's the problem, because human nature is counterintuitive to problems. We don't think about creating estate plans until we're about to die, or we just don't want to think about our own mortality, or you don't think about asset protection until you're already until something happens. You're already getting sued, or I let my insurance lapse. Now I got in a car accident. Man, what can I do now? This is the reason why being preventative and proactive beforehand leads to better results.
What's that old saying about an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure? So it's
there's a lot of sayings like that, and really it's 100% correct. It's just a lot of people like to kick that can down the road and rely on wishful thinking. It's not going to happen to me. That happened to John. That happened to Sally. That ain't me. I'm smarter than them. But that's not, wishful thinking is not, an actual good preventative measure.
If you're trying to scare people into do this thing because look what can happen, and you are purporting something that is we can save you from a meteor hitting Earth. Well, come on, what's the chance of that happen versus just open up your browser on the internet and see how many people are getting sued for all kinds of things. And so we know that this kind of thing happens, and we know that, business owners, and like you said, the person with the Porsche, you want to look good to your clients, you want to have that persona, but if you look really, really good on paper, you might not look good in the bank accounts because you just might be leveraged up to the hilt, but people don't think that, and then here they come. So I think that's a really interesting realization.
Yeah. And so, what we want to do, with, asset protection is create it before it happens. So then it's like, okay, what's this new fancy word? Asset protection. And especially in today's crazy world that we're living in, especially with all this economic insecurity. And what people need to realize is, even though money is getting tight, especially even though you're investing, this is when all the sharks come out to sue. Yeah. You actually have, I think it's like a 35% increase in lawsuits in economic hard times. So, because more and more people are looking for paydays. So it's even more important now as we're going into economic and global insecurities to protect what you have while you're still trying to grow, your portfolio. So it's very important to establish now. So then it comes down to what is this weird word, asset protection? And just think of it as, modern estate planning. And what we're doing is placing a legal barrier between your assets and the, potential creditor, the person suing you and trying to take all your money from you before it's needed. And that's it. That's the key word. And so it's a barrier, like a safe that you put your gold and your guns or, jewelry in. Anything of value you want to put behind the legal barrier and out of your personal name, so that's not easily attached with a lien or reached. So think of it just like the rich. I love the Tony Robbins saying, success leaves clues. Yeah. The rich don't own things in their personal names. Their businesses do, their trusts do. They just get the beneficial use and enjoyment out of them, while separating out the liability side of it. And then, one of the caveats is, if we have time, I don't think we'll have time to really break this concept down, maybe another time. It's just realize asset protection planning is not tax planning. It's not tax mitigation planning. They're completely different. And so we're protecting assets.
It'll flow back to you that way. But one thing I want to clarify is this: you still have full access to the assets. So it's still your car, your house, your bank accounts, and all that. It's just that if you pulled up your account and it's instead of Tom Smith, it's the Tom Smith Family Trust or whatever the case is. So it protects you that way. So I think a lot of people might go, yeah, but I need to have access to my whatever. You still do, right?
Correct. You're still, if you're using LLCs and business entities, you're still the managing members of it. If you're using a trust, you're still the creator of it, the settler of it, the trustee, the beneficiary of it. It's still your assets. We're just creating that legal barrier of you personally owning it in your name for liability issues to now I get the beneficial use and enjoyment of my car, my yacht, my plane, my rental properties, my cash, my stocks, but now I'm the managing member of my things.
Yep. You still have the key to the car. You can go drive it, but it's just not in your name. And so you got to make a few paperwork changes, because I remember when my dad passed away a few months ago, he had his house in a trust. And I remember that, now there was a different process for that. And it wasn't just the Tom Smith trust, or the Tom Smith property, it was in the name of a trust. So I think that's a big thing to keep in mind. So many times we hear, this person, barely rear-ended someone, but now that it was a nice car, they're getting sued, for huge money. But if all of your cars and assets are in this protection vehicle, now you don't have to worry personally.
Correct. And then, as you're going, people are like, okay, hey, what kind of, systems do we create and set? And I think you should think of it as layering. You create layers of protection as you grow, depending on what your risk level is and what your net worth is. And a great way to kind of think of these layers is to think about wintertime, okay? When it comes to asset protection, we have different layers. The first entry layer is going to be a base layer, and it's going to sit on your skin. This is generally an LLC in insurance. You're just starting out. You have 0 to 3 units or properties that you're investing in. Your net worth is generally, I'm going to say exposed net worth. I'm taking 401ks and IRAs out because those are exempt through ERISA and state exemptions. So we're talking about, equity in your personal residence and your rental properties and your personal stock portfolios, cash, cryptos, syndication investments. So when your net worth is going to be generally below 250,000, we're talking about you're just starting out. That's going to be generally one LLC and insurance. And then as you grow and you start adding more assets and you hit around kind of that 4 units mark, or you're investing in multiple states and you now have the need for multiple LLCs, and now your net worth has increased to around 500,000 to 700,000 net. This is where you want a mid layer, which is going to be a little bit thicker. It's going to be like a merino wool sweater sitting over your skin-based layer, or a cardigan for you ladies. And this is going to be called a management company. Some people use Wyoming LLCs. We generally use limited partnerships for that mid layer. But it's a second degree of separation that for protection wise. And it starts helping you with managing your system and taxes. So you maintain just one tax filing. You can have 50, 100 LLCs. The idea is have them flow into a management company. So you have one tax filing and an easier accounting system in play. And then when you hit around, what's that?
I was just going to ask a question about that. That is like, I like how you're given the stair step approach. Under a certain amount, you have one layer. Then now we're into this, which when I start hearing about LLC, I'm like, oh, well, I've heard commercials and Google, and I'll just go Google and set things up. What I would wonder is, this is probably not the time to go Google something, download a document and file it. You want to make sure it's being done the right way. So whether it is the lower level or the management company level, you want to make sure that these things are set up properly for your needs.
Absolutely. Like at the end of the day, you get what you pay for. So if you're going to be trying to create, cheap LLC, just realize once you're getting sued by a lawyer who's a shark who wants to take everything from you, they're looking for one thing wrong with the operating agreements or your funding issues to pierce your veil. So everything's only going to be as good as, the person who set it up for you. So that's where you use the experts. And that's why, you want to use attorneys to set these things up and not just like Google and get templates or run off to, I forget the name of the companies, Legal Zoom type of stuff like that, to where here's a blanket template, good luck. Well, that's not going to really work for you. I pierced through those all the time, went back in my trial days. And then, so we're going through the layers, right? We got the skin-based layer, LLCs and insurance. You're just starting. You got that second degree layer, the limited partnerships or the management companies. That's your sweatshirt layer, merino wool layer, cardigan layer. Then you have your outer shell waterproof layer. You hit that $1 million net worth mark. It takes people a long time to get there most of the time, or you're high risk. You're a doctor now making some money with investments, lawyer, CPA, you're sponsoring deals maybe. This again is your outer shell waterproof, jacket layer. You're out in Siberia or Alaska, or you're going out skiing. This keeps you nice and dry and warm when the weather's really bad. This is your doomsday lawsuit protection layer. These are asset protection trust. Okay. But by layering like this, you're now more flexible. You can adjust to make yourself more comfortable. And when you're shopping around, talking to different attorneys about this, I want you to remember this acronym, ECCC, effectiveness, cost, control, and compliance. And when the idea is to get all 4 of those within your asset protection plan, because if it's not effective, no one's going to care that you have it. They're going to try to pierce through it. And then again, you want to be able to control your assets, right? And then you need to have reasonable, sustainable costs, because if you can't afford it, you're not going to do anything. And if the costs get out of control, you're just going to stop it. And then the compliance is a big deal, because if it's too confusing to comply with the IRS, after 1 or 2 years, you're just going to stop and the whole system falls apart. Mm-hmm. So each layer has different pros and cons to them. Like LLCs, they're not very effective. They're cheap, but then and there's not much compliance, but then you lose on effectiveness. So there's always pros and cons to everything. And that's where you go with the scale up, to where ultimately you want a very strong hybrid trust, because then you hit all 4 of those key markers.
And with that type of trust, we're talking asset protection trust, like the hybrid. I'm certain that there are costs to set it up, and then cost to maintain it, and then cost to, maintain it within the realm of compliance. So are there, obviously there's cost to set it up, but then are there ongoing legal costs to maintain that, in addition to like the tax CPA kind of filings to maintain compliance?
That's a good question. So generally it depends on the type of trust you have. And I can break that down real quick in a minute. But to answer that question, it depends on if it's domestic or foreign. If it's a foreign trust, and it's a purely foreign trust, then you're going to end up paying probably close to $10,000 a year to maintain just a purely foreign trust, because there's so many mandatory IRS compliances like 1035s, 1035As, back to disclosures. And those are just very time consuming and costly to file. So that's why you generally don't go purely foreign. Domestic trust, no, because they're domestic. That's one of the benefits of having a domesticated trust, asset protection trust, is you don't have those IRS disclosures. The problem is they're just not very effective anymore. We have too much case law just piercing the domestic asset protection trust. So the idea is to marry the two together. And so I'm going to break down this real quick to where like some people are like, okay, like what are trusts? Like I have a trust, I have a revocable living trust, so I'm good to go. But no, there's a lot of different types of trusts, right? Just like Baskin Robbins has a lot of different types of ice cream and flavors of ice cream. It's all ice cream, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, sherbet. You have all these different types of ice cream, but they're and just like trust, different types of trust, but not all trusts are the same. So the standard 101 trust that everybody's familiar with, it started in the 1960s, is that revocable living trust, that family trust. And what's great about those are, trusts don't die, so that when you do, and you actually funded that trust properly and transferred ownership and title into it, you don't have to go through the courts and through probate, and it changed the landscape of estate planning. And then you have, what you hear people talking about now, land trusts for real estate, to hold your land, your properties in, and then you connect them to LLCs. But what you need to realize is it's just still base layer protection. It's only as strong as the LLC that is connected to, because land trusts themselves don't have any protection in them. They're just privacy mechanisms. They're not protection mechanisms. And then from there, as you get higher up in your net worth and more risk, you have higher levels of protection of trust, which are called asset protection trust. And this is where you either have the offshore or the domestic and the hybrid. And the difference of these trusts are they're called asset protection trusts, or what's called self-settled spendthrift trusts. So they're created for you, by you, as your own beneficiary. And they have these really cool provisions in them called spendthrift provisions that protects you from creditors coming after you. And so that's really what separates out these asset protection trusts from a revocable living trust, is these self-settled spendthrift preservations, and that they're irrevocable, not revocable. And what irrevocable means is it's harder to change, and a judge can't order you to say, hey, go revoke this clause. I don't like it. Now I'm going to order you to revoke it, or I'm going to hold you in civil contempt of courts. And so, just remember, trust, it's like different types of ice cream. So you got to make sure you're picking the right trust for the right need. Hey, I need an estate plan. I need to name my beneficiaries and my medical directives, financial directives. Well, that's your revocable living trust, your family estate plan. Hey, I have assets and I want to protect my assets so if I get sued, I don't lose them. Those are asset protection trusts. And then in the world of asset protection trust, we can either go offshore, onshore, or we can hybrid them out and try to, combine the best of both worlds of all of them.
And to your point too, if you're below a certain net worth, you might only need this one. Then when you get between here and here, you might need that. And again, that gets back to, you need to know your ultimate goal. You need to know your level of risk exposure, and and then work with someone that knows how to put these things together, because it certainly is not a www.download.
Correct. No. And especially when you start getting into the world of trust and then hybrid trust, because what you're doing with a hybrid trust is you're combining the strongest trusts in the world, the famous Cook Island Offshore Trust, which has statutory non-recognition of any judgment or court order in the world. So that would mean a valid lawsuit, valid plaintiff, valid claim. You lost the case, so you got a judgment order against you. But all of your assets are nice and safe in that foreign jurisdiction, the Cook Islands, which means they're going to take that judgment, throw it in the trash, and say, too bad, you got to sue us down here, and meet through all these plethora of statutory hurdles, which the U.S. government can't even pierce through. Those type of trusts, very expensive. You're talking about $50,000 and $12,000 a year to maintain. Then you have the other option, the domestic one, cheaper, generally around $12,000 to set up, no IRS compliance whatsoever, but not every state recognizes them. And then you're having a lot of case law of the domestic cases actually being broken, because you got like Bately versus Morrison, Ray Hubbard, Kilker versus Steelman, Dale versus Dale. So tons of case law of, actually factually good cases to where those defendants should not have been pierced but the judges just wield their magic power and said, well, hey, I don't agree with this, and on public policy reasons, I'm piercing into this, or we're not recognizing this law. And an example of that is Kilker versus Steelman, where you have California that doesn't recognize asset protection trusts. They have no statutes. So California residents would run off to Nevada and create a Nevada asset protection trust. And then the state of California was like, listen, we're tired of this. You're California residents. We don't recognize out-of-state asset protection trusts. We don't recognize them in period, in general. So we pierced into that and we're no longer recognizing them. So you really need to realize a lot of this jurisdictional stuff depends on what state that you're in, where the assets are held, so we can pick the right trust and option. And then that's where the hybrid trust really comes into play, because we can take that offshore strength, domesticate it so it's cheaper to set up and no IRS compliance. But God forbid you ever have that doomsday lawsuit. Well, the trust is what it is. It is an offshore trust. So we can what's called break a bridge. And now the trust is just a purely foreign trust. So you're combining the best of both worlds.
And to your point about who it benefits, if you're thinking that you would be really exposed in a certain area, I would venture to say that a quick conversation with you to get some guidance on, how exposed am I? And what type would I need? I think that's the thing that I think someone would go, I've heard about the word trust, but wow, you've opened up this whole myriad of available trust. And like you said about the Baskin-Robbins flavors, which flavor is best for me? And there's not a one certain answer, because, what are your end goals? What is your exposure now? All of these things, are you real estate or not, domestic? So I would venture to say that you would be talking with someone and you've got a series of questions that you would ask them so that you can easily guide them through that process, right? And understand.
Correct. And then, and I would say also on that, know which expert you're talking to, because just like a medical doctor, right? You can go to your family practitioner doctor. Well, they're not going to be able to talk to you about brain surgery, or orthopedics, so you got an orthopedic surgeon talking to you about your heart, so you got to realize, okay, hey, I have these assets. I'm going to go talk to my family estate planning attorney. Most likely they know nothing about asset protection. And if you come to me talking about, well, I want to protect my assets, but I also want, this, and this done, like, well, that's not my area of law. So you need to realize you got to go to the right expert for the right thing. Just because we're lawyers doesn't mean we practice every area of law. Just like medical doctors, we can give you generally advice and then say, hey, go talk to this expert. But also a lot of people don't want to pass up work, especially in the legal field. So they'll try to pretend to be an expert.
Yeah.
So you need to realize you got to go to the right expert for the right thing. So if you're looking for an estate plan, go get your estate plan attorney to create that. But then when you have assets that need to be protected, you really need to talk to an asset protection attorney. And even there, depending on how high a risk and how high your net worth is, there's only so many attorneys in the nation that actually do asset protection at a very high level, where they're using foreign trusts and hybrid trusts, because most attorneys and law firms, it's almost like insurance. They're trying to cast wide nets to work with as many people as they can. Most people aren't extremely high net worth or high risk. So their knowledge will stop around LLCs and management companies, and they don't really work in the world of asset protection trust. So you have to be able to ask the right questions to weigh, where does this law firm's knowledge and clientele profile stop? Because each firm will have a specific clientele profile that they're working with, but they're never going to try to turn down work, right? Because they're a business.
And then it's kind of like the old Mr. Miyagi quote, if you know just a little bit of karate, you'll get squashed like a grape.
Correct.
So have someone that is a specialist in that sub niche category and someone that really knows how to set it up properly. So Brian, this has been really eye-opening and helpful, because it's bust through some of the myths that, I'm just good to go because, or I set this up and I'm fine. But there's a lot of these variables. So if someone is interested in learning more and then maybe having you look into their situation to give that guidance, what's the best way they can reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can jump on my website, www.btblegal.com. I use my website as an educational source for people. So lots of case law, lots of educational links, frequently asked questions. Just click through there, educate yourself. The more knowledge you have, then the more questions you can ask the person that you're looking to try to work with to see where they're at. And then you know if you're getting sold a bag of BS or not. Or just email me, Brian, Brian at btblegal.com. I generally do a 30-minute free consultation. And then at least you get like, here's your risk profile. Here's kind of where I think you lie in this matrix world of asset protection. For me, like I generally am doing high net worth clients. So we're doing a hybrid trust with a limited partnership and LLCs. Like that's generally around like 30,000 to start. Doesn't mean that that's where you're at, but that's kind of where you want to be. So maybe you need that halfway point, that limited partnership or the LLC, but you won't know until you actually talk to someone and say, where's my risk profile? Where's my net worth that's exposed? And, how do we scale this in?
100%. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.